We don't belong in the same world anymore.
I sold my mother's earrings for your future.
I never asked you to
Sacrifice everything.
No.
You just forgot who did.
$3.8 million?
I learned about it 10 months ago.
Why didn't you tell me?
You stopped seeing your wife before.
Amara, we can fix this.
You already chose a life without me.
Why hide everything from your husband?
Because you hid your shame of me first.
The morning the divorce papers arrived, Amara Williams was elbow deep in a crate of fresh flounder at her stall in the Charleston public market. Her hands were raw from ice water. Salt had dried white on her wrists. The courier called her name twice before she looked up. She signed without asking what was inside. She already knew. What she didn't know, what Christopher had never stopped to consider, was that she had been ready for this for longer than he would ever realize. Welcome to today's story. If you enjoy emotional drama and shocking twists, don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more unforgettable stories. And before we begin, let me know where you're watching from in the comments. It had started the way most things in her life did, in the dark, before the rest of the city woke up, with someone who needed more than she had to give. She was 23 when she first saw Christopher Williams at the Charleston City Market. He was standing in the narrow lane between her stall and the next one, arguing quietly into his phone, his shoes too thin for the wet concrete, a worn leather bag tucked under his arm. She noticed the way he held himself, like someone keeping something from spilling, using careful effort to stay contained. An hour later, she found him sitting on the loading dock behind the market, phone dark in his hand, his head dropped forward. She brought him a paper cup of black coffee without being asked. He looked up, startled. "You look like you're trying to solve something you can't solve standing still," she said. He was in his second year at the University of South Carolina School of Law. His scholarship had covered tuition but not the semester fees. The registrar's office had a 10-day window to make payment. After that, the semester was forfeit. His name was Christopher. He had no one else to call. Amara had $1. $400 in savings she'd been building for 18 months. She'd intended to use it for a cold storage upgrade. That same afternoon, she pulled $800 from her lockbox, folded it inside a receipt, and handed it to him without ceremony or conditions. "Pay me back when you can," she said. "Don't make me regret it." He stood there a moment too long. She finally pointed at the exit. "Registration office closes at 4. He went. He came back 3 weeks later with a handwritten thank you card and a handshake that turned into a conversation that turned into dinner at a small place near campus, where they split one entree because neither wanted to seem like they needed to. She wore the good dress she kept for occasions. He had borrowed a friend's blazer. They talked until the restaurant's staff started stacking chairs around them. 2 years later, they married in a courthouse ceremony in Columbia. Sandra, who ran the stall next to hers, stood as witness. Dorothy Williams, Christopher's mother, attended in a silk blouse with the smile that was present only on the surface. The years that followed were the kind that don't look like much from the outside, but cost everything from the inside. Amara woke before 4 most mornings. She expanded from 1 stall to 2 and took on debt when the season required it and paid it back when she could. When Christopher's third-year tuition came due and his part-time work wasn't enough, she pulled money from the stall's operating account and slid it across the kitchen table without making it a moment. When he needed bar preparation materials she couldn't absorb into the budget, she drove to a jewelry shop on King Street and sold the pearl earrings her mother had left her, the only good pair she'd owned. She didn't tell Christopher what she'd sold. She told him the money came from an early return on a supplier account. He was deep in case briefs and didn't ask twice. When an unexpected bar prep course fee came through that she hadn't budgeted for, she went to her cold storage supplier and asked for another month of credit. No explanation. He gave it. He'd watched her work long enough to know she would pay. She kept every receipt from those years, the cold room invoices, the supplier accounts, the pawn shop slip, in a plain envelope at the back of the kitchen drawer. Not because she planned to use them. She just couldn't throw them away. The morning Christopher called to say he had passed the bar, Amara was unloading a delivery in the rain at 6 in the morning. She sat down on the back steps of the market and cried until Sandra appeared and sat beside her without saying a word. It was exactly what she needed. He was going to be a lawyer. She had known it was coming. She had arranged her whole life around the fact of it. What she hadn't let herself think too carefully about was what came next. Standing at her stall now, the divorce envelope on the counter, Amara ran a cloth over the display case. Sandra hadn't arrived yet. A thin line of orange was spreading along the harbor. She picked up the envelope, turned it once, set it back down. Then she reached into her apron pocket and drew out a different envelope, a certified letter from Marcus Webb, attorney at law, OC Estate Management. She had received it 10 months ago. She had met with Marcus 6 weeks after that, once she's understood what it meant. She placed Marcus's letter on top of Christopher's divorce papers and left both on the counter. She would read them when Sandra arrived. Some things should not be read alone. The bar call ceremony was on a Friday afternoon in October, held in a wood-paneled courtroom in Columbia that smelled of old carpet and something like ambition. Christopher wore a suit he'd bought with his first paycheck from the part-time clerking position, dark navy, slightly broad at the shoulders, the first one he'd ever bought without checking the price tag, twice. Amara had pressed the collar that morning while he stood at the kitchen counter, making small adjustments to the mirror's angle. "You're going to burn me," he said. "I've been ironing since I was 12. Stand still." He stood still. He recited the oath in a clear, unhurried voice that carried to the back of the room. When it was over and the new attorneys moved into the hallway, Christopher found Amara before he found his mother. He put both hands on her face. "We did it," he said. "You did it." No. He didn't let her look away. She filed that moment somewhere careful in the same interior place she kept other things that mattered too much to examine directly. He meant it. She was certain he meant it. She held on to that certainty the way you hold water in cupped hands. The reception afterward was at Dorothy's house in Mount Pleasant. Catered white linen tablecloths, not mentioned to Amara until 4 days before. She brought a fruit arrangement and a card she had written 3 draft s of before settling on something honest. Dorothy accepted the fruit with the voice she used when she didn't mean thank you. The arrangement was moved to the kitchen within the first hour. Amara stayed near the drinks table and watched Christopher work the room. He was good at it in a way she'd always recognized but never quite had words for. He moved from group to group with ease, open, warm, gravitational. Each handshake landed with the right amount of pressure. Each smile held eye contact for exactly as long as it needed to. He had always known how to be the person a room wanted him to be. She also understood, watching him from across the living room with a glass of sparkling water in her hand, that his success had created a world she wasn't sure she had the map to navigate. The people in that room moved in a language she hadn't been given access to, the particular rhythm of professional social climbing, the art of implying things without saying them, the careful craft of an introduction that did more work than the words. She'd built her working life on knowledge that ran bone deep. She could read a catch before the boats finished unloading. She could tell you which shrimp suppliers cut their weight and which ones didn't. She knew how to negotiate credit without losing the relationship, how to manage inventory through an off-season, how to keep a stall profitable when the tourist traffic dried up. That knowledge had kept them alive for 6 years. But it wasn't the grammar being spoken in Dorothy's living room. And she knew it. She drove home alone that night because Christopher stayed to talk with a senior partner who'd expressed interest in his litigation background. She got in a little after 11. She ate toast standing at the kitchen sink and did not call him. 3 weeks later, he started at Marshall & Cole. The firm occupied the 4th floor of a building on East Bay Street with glass doors and a lobby that had real art on the walls, not prints, actual pieces, hung with intention. Christopher called her from the parking garage on his first morning, voice pitched differently than she was used to. Lighter. Charged with something. "First impression?" she asked. "Good firm, serious people. My office has a window that looks east. You can see the harbor." She was at the stall, ice on her hands, shrimp on the scale. "That's good. You always worked better near water. I was thinking the same thing." She smiled. She was genuinely glad for him. That part was completely real. The weeks that followed were an adjustment, gradual, without a clear turning point. Christopher worked long hours. The cases were complex and new, and the expectations were higher than anything he'd managed before. He came home tired in the way that engaged, demanding work makes a person tired, spent but satisfied. Like someone who'd used exactly the muscles they'd been building. She understood that. She didn't ask for details he couldn't share under confidentiality, but she noticed that Vanessa Cole's name started appearing in his evening conversation with regularity. Not every night, but enough. Cole gave the most precise opening statement I've heard in 5 of watching court, he said one Tuesday at dinner. No seated language, every sentence carrying weight. She sounds sharp, Amara said. Very. She also knows the whole circuit, judges, state attorneys, senior partners at 4 other firms. The network she's built is substantial. He paused, like he was catching himself on something. Anyway, she's good at her job. Amara put his plate in front of him. She poured herself a glass of water and sat across from him and listened to him talk about his day. She had always been a good listener. It was one of the things he used to say he loved about her. She was still listening. She just wasn't sure he'd noticed. 3 weeks into the job, on a Wednesday afternoon, she drove to the firm with lunch she'd packed that morning. Roasted chicken, rice, a wedge of cornbread the way he liked it. The lobby receptionist gave her a polite, slightly blank look when she explained who she was. "I'll let Mr. Williams know you're here," the woman said. He came down 7 minutes later, loosened tie, a slight flush on his throat. "I brought lunch," Amara said, holding up the bag. He looked at the bag, then at the lobby. A senior partner walked through the space behind the desk and gave Christopher a nod. "Cole and I were going to grab something," he said. "There's a case we need to work through." "Oh." She held the bag another moment. "Take it anyway. For later." He took it. She smiled and went back to her car. She sat in the parking garage for 3 minutes before starting the engine. That night, he thanked her for the food. Said it was delicious. He'd eaten it at his desk. She asked nothing further. She let it settle in the quiet space between them where more and more things were being stored. She hadn't imagined it. The small arithmetic she'd seen him do with his eyes when she held up the bag. The brief weighing of something. She understood what was being weighed, even if he didn't say it. The 47th time she heard Vanessa Cole's name, Amara was finishing the last of the dinner dishes. She set the last plate in the drying rack and stood at the window above the sink, looking out at the street. Christopher's voice drifted from the next room. He was on the phone, his tone pleasant, professional, the particular warmth he reserved for people whose respect he was still building. She didn't need to hear the full conversation to understand what it meant. She had learned to read the things. Christopher didn't say the same way she'd learned to read a fish market, by paying attention to what was there and what wasn't. She dried her hands. She went to bed. She lay in the dark for a while before she slept, thinking about a word he'd used weeks ago, network, and the kind of life it described. Not a failure on her part, just a different architecture. She'd built the house he lived in. She'd just never been shown the blueprints for the extension he was adding. 4 months into Christopher's time at Marshall & Cole, he and Vanessa Cole were co-counseling a commercial property dispute, a case involving a contested land title, multiple parties, and a volume of documentation that required late evenings and the kind of close collaboration that builds its own shorthand. Christopher came home mentioning details of the work in fragments that felt more like thinking aloud than conversation, a deposition that ran long, a document produced at the last minute, an argument Cole had reframed on the spot in a way that altered the whole shape of the negotiation. Amara listened the way she always listened. She asked questions when she could follow. She stopped asking when the shorthand became too dense to enter. In early November, an invitation came through Christopher's work account for a wine tasting at a senior partner's home in the South of Broad neighborhood, a professional social event, the kind that Marshall & Cole held 3 or 4 times a year to keep the firm's internal culture from becoming entirely transactional. The invitation included spouses. Christopher mentioned it to Amara 2 days before. "Do you want to come?" he asked. It wasn't the question that gave her pause. It was the way he asked it, Not an invitation exactly, more like a formality being discharged. She said yes anyway. She dressed carefully that evening, not trying to impress anyone in particular, just trying to look like herself, cleanly and with attention. A dark green wrap dress she'd had for 3 years but rarely wore, simple earrings. She drove to the address on the invitation while Christopher went directly from the office. The partner's house was large and well lit, full of people she didn't recognize who all seemed to know each other. Christopher was already inside when she arrived, standing near the fireplace in a group of 4 people that included Vanessa Cole. She saw him see her, saw the slight reset in his posture, not unwelcome, but a reorganization, like rearranging a room to accommodate unexpected furniture. He introduced her to the group. "This is my wife, Amara." Vanessa Cole held out her hand. "I've heard a little about you." Her smile was clean and genuine and revealed nothing. "The market, right? I've actually bought shrimp there. It's a good operation." "Thank you," Amara said. "We try to keep it worth the drive." The conversation moved on. Christopher turned toward a colleague who'd just arrived. Amara stayed in the group for another few minutes before gravitating toward the edge of the room where she found a spot near a bookshelf and a woman named Patricia, who worked in trusts and estates and was happy to talk about something other than litigation. She was standing there 40 minutes later when she heard Christopher's voice on the other side of a partial wall. She wasn't trying to listen. The house was full of people and sound carried unevenly. He was talking to someone about a case, then about Cole's approach to client communication. Then the other person asked a question she didn't fully hear, and Christopher said, "My wife? She's someone from home." "She runs a business at the public market?" Someone from home. She stood completely still. Not a mistake she'd misheard. Not a phrase he'd used carelessly. Someone from home. The distance in it was exact. Not his wife in this room, in this world, among these people. Someone from a different category of life, brought along out of obligation. She excused herself from Patricia and found the bathroom down the hall. She stood over the sink with the water running cold and looked at her own face in the mirror. She didn't look broken. She didn't feel broken. She felt something quieter and more permanent than broken. She felt the things settle into place that had been assembling for months. She dried her hands. She returned to the party. She stood beside Christopher for another 40 minutes, contributed to 2 conversations, and did not give him any indication that she had heard anything. On the drive home, he sat in the passenger seat and talked about the evening, who he'd spoken to, what he'd learned about a pending appointment to the State Bar Committee. She drove. She said, at the right intervals. She kept her eyes on the road. He didn't ask her what she'd thought of the event. He didn't notice she'd gone quiet. The next morning, Toby Marsh arrived at 6 with the week's shrimp delivery. He was a large, deliberate man, reliable in the way that people who'd never once promised what they couldn't deliver were reliable. He'd been supplying her stall for 5 years. He set the crates down, checked the weight against his clipboard, and then looked at her once in the direct way he had. "You all right?" he asked. "Yes," she said. He held the look for a moment, then went back to his truck without pressing. He came back with a second crate and set it beside the first. "Kept you an extra half-pound of the Gulf shrimp," he said. "Good batch today. You didn't have to do that." "I know." He finished loading and drove away. She stood in the cool morning air and thought about the difference between someone who saw you and someone who called you by the right name when it mattered. Later that afternoon, as she was closing the stall, her phone rang. "Dorothy," she answered. "Amara, I'm calling because I think of you." "Like a daughter," Dorothy began. The opening always preceded something that had nothing to do with affection. She listened. Dorothy talked about a charity gala Marshall & Cole was participating in, about how certain appearances shaped reputations in this city, about how a partner track attorney needed a particular kind of presentation beside him. "I'm only saying what a good daughter-in-law would benefit from hearing first," Dorothy said. "Think about what's best for Christopher's image. That's all I'm saying." "I appreciate you telling me," Amara said. She ended the call. She sat in her car in the dark parking lot behind the market for a while. Then she started the engine and drove home. Dorothy came to the apartment on a Thursday while Christopher was at the firm. She called first, which she rarely did, and the call itself felt like a courtesy extended in advance of something that would not be courteous. Amara made coffee. Dorothy declined and sat at the kitchen table in a posture that communicated she had come to say something and intended to say it without being derailed by pleasantries. "I'm going to be direct with you," she said. "Christopher is at a critical point in his career. The people around him, the cases he takes, the clients he attracts, the way he is perceived at firm events, all of it matters. You know that." Amara said nothing. She wrapped both hands around her mug. "The market is honest work," Dorothy continued. "I've never said otherwise. But there are perceptions, Amara. People who see his wife in an apron at a fish stall on a Saturday morning draw conclusions. It affects how they see him." "The market kept him in law school," Amara said. "And I'm grateful for that. I am. But a ladder is not something you carry on your head after you've climbed it." Dorothy's voice was even, almost kind, the way a person sounds when they've rehearsed something enough times to remove the guilt from it. "All I'm asking is that you think about what role is most helpful to him now. Something in his office, perhaps. Or simply being present at home when he needs it. There are wives in that firm who—" "I understand what you're saying," Amara said. "Good. Then I hope you'll consider it seriously." Dorothy left 20 minutes later. Amara stood at the window and watched her car pull away from the curb. She was not angry in the way she had expected to be. She'd felt anger before, hot, quick, rising in the throat. This was different. This was something that settled like temperature change, slow, comprehensive, and difficult to reverse. When Christopher came home that evening, she told him about the visit. She kept her voice level. She stated what his mother had said and waited. He set his keys on the counter. He was quiet for a moment. "She's not wrong that image matters," he said. "In this city, with the circles the firm runs in, she told me the fish market embarrasses you. She didn't say that. She didn't use that word. What's the word she did use?" He looked at her directly then. "Amara, she's protective. She's my mother. She's your mother who collected money from my sales to cover her car payment 2 years ago, and now she's at my table, telling me my livelihood is a liability." He said nothing. "I'm not closing the stall," she said. "I want you to understand that clearly." He went to the refrigerator. He opened it, looked at its contents without taking anything, and closed it again. "I'm not asking you to close it." "Then what are you asking me to do?" He didn't answer. He went to change out of his work clothes, and the conversation ended by his leaving it. That Friday evening, Amara drove to the community college on the north side of the city and walked into the enrollment office. She signed up for an evening business administration course, 14 weeks, twice a week, starting the following Monday. She paid the fee with her own debit card. She told no one. She was not doing it to prove anything to Dorothy. She was not doing it to position herself differently in Christopher's world. She was doing it because the thing Dorothy had said, unintentionally, cruelly, but not inaccurately, was that Amara's life outside her marriage was small. And Amara was not willing to let that be permanently true. She started on Monday. The class met in a room with fluorescent lighting and plastic chairs. She sat near the front. The instructor was a retired regional sales director who was precise and unsentimental and who did not treat the evening students as lesser for arriving at these concepts later in life. Amara took notes in a way she hadn't since she was in school. Carefully, completely, with the particular attention of someone who understood what the knowledge was for. She came home after the first class to find Christopher already asleep. She put her notebooks in the small desk in the second bedroom and did not mention where she'd been. 3 weeks later, sorting through a stack of accumulated mail on the kitchen counter, something she did every few weeks when the pile outgrew its corner, she came across a certified letter she didn't recognize. The return address was a law office in Atlanta. Marcus Webb, Esq, OC Estate Management. She'd received it months ago. She remembered now it had arrived during a bad week, somewhere between a supplier dispute and a stall refrigeration failure, and she'd set it aside with the intention of dealing with it later. Later had become much less later. She sat down at the kitchen table. She opened the envelope. The letter was 1 page, formal, precise. It addressed her as beneficiary of the O.C. Family Trust, established by Raymond O.C., deceased, and informed her that as sole named beneficiary, she was entitled to the full distribution of the trust's assets, the nature and scope of which would be discussed during an in-person consultation with the estate attorney. She read it twice. Then she set it face down on the table. Raymond O.C., her father, who had left when she was 18, whose letters she had returned unopened 3 years ago, who was apparently now dead. She sat at the table for a long time without moving. Then she flipped the letter back over and read the phone number at the bottom. She took out her phone and called it. The call went to voicemail. "My name is Amara Williams," she said. "I received your letter about the Raymond O.C. estate. I would like to speak with you." She ended the call. She put the letter back in its envelope and placed it in the folder she kept in the desk drawer with her business documents. Then she went to bed and lay in the dark beside Christopher, who was already asleep, and thought about a man she had decided not to know. Marcus Webb called back the following Tuesday morning. He had a measured, unhurried voice, the voice of someone who had spent a long career delivering news of significant weight and had learned to do it without generating unnecessary alarm. He explained who he was. Estate attorney, O.C. Family Trust, Atlanta-based practice. He confirmed her identity through her date of birth and her mother's name, 2 pieces of information she had not expected him to know. He told her that Raymond O.C. had passed away 8 months ago, in October, from pancreatic cancer. He had been ill for 14 months before that. The trust had been established 6 years prior, and Amara was named as sole beneficiary. The estate had been in probate for the past 8 months, and all matters were now cleared for distribution. He asked if she would be willing to come to Atlanta for an in-person consultation to review the assets in full. She told him she needed a week. She told Christopher she had to meet a supplier in Atlanta that Saturday, a new contact for a premium shrimp line she was exploring. Christopher said he had a firm function that evening anyway, so the timing worked. He asked no further questions. She had noticed that he had stopped asking about her work in any specific way. He asked questions when she raised something. He did not raise it himself. She drove up on a Saturday morning in early December, stopping once for coffee near the Georgia border. Marcus Webb's office was in Buckhead, a suite in a building with a quiet lobby and no signage that implied urgency or drama. He was a tall man in his late 60s, silver-haired, with the kind of steady attention that made a person feel both carefully observed and completely safe. He opened with the facts. Raymond O.C. had arrived in Atlanta from Ghana in 1989, 22 years old, with a work visa and a specific intention to build something that could not be taken from him. He had started with a single laundromat in DeKalb County, added a second, then a third. By the time Amara was born, he had 6 operating locations. By the time he left the family, when Amara was 18 and her mother was dying and everything was falling apart in a way that Raymond apparently couldn't hold, he had begun acquiring residential rental properties. He kept building after he left. That was the fact Amara had not known and had not wanted to know. He built commercial properties in Decatur and Marietta. He invested steadily, conservatively, in indexed funds and bonds. When he got sick, he structured everything carefully and deliberately, updated the trust to reflect current market values, and specified Amara by name, with full legal identifying information. The O.C. Family Trust held a total of $8 million in assets, 4 residential rental properties with steady tenants, 1 commercial property currently under long-term lease, 2 investment accounts, and a cash reserve. Marcus placed a folder in front of her. She opened it and looked at the summary sheet. She read the number. She read it again. "He tried to reach you," Marcus said quietly. "About 3 years ago. He sent a letter. He understood when you didn't respond. He understood," she repeated it. "He said, and I'm quoting directly because I wrote it down when he said it. He said, 'She has every right to not want to hear from me. That doesn't change what I intend to do for her.'" She closed the folder. Raymond O.C. had not been a good father. He had not been present. When her mother was dying of an illness that required everything from Amara and left nothing, no money, no help, no margin for grief, he had been in Atlanta building laundromats. She had told herself for 16 years that she had made peace with this. She understood now that what she had actually done was build a life on the decision not to feel it. The number in the folder was not redemption. She was clear-eyed about that. It was not an apology or a repair. It was the action of a man who knew what he'd failed to give and tried to give the only thing he still had access to. She sat in Marcus's office for nearly 2 hours. She asked precise, practical questions. She asked about the rental property's current management, the lease terms on the commercial building, the investment account structures, the tax implications of the full distribution. Marcus answered everything clearly and without unnecessary elaboration. He had clearly expected her to be practical. She could tell he was relieved. When she stood to leave, she paused. "My husband doesn't know about this," she said. Marcus' tone did not change. That's not unusual during a preliminary consultation. Many beneficiaries take time before sharing information with family members. "I'm not sure how long I'll need," she said. "Take the time you need," he said. The trust isn't going anywhere. I'll send you the full documentation package this week." She drove home in the dark, somewhere in South Carolina. Past the wide flatness of the low-country marshland, she pulled into a rest stop and sat in the parking lot for 20 minutes. She had spent her adult life giving and building and holding things together with less than she needed. She had sold her mother's earrings. She had lived on the edge of the operating budget. She had sat in empty restaurants and watched Christopher find his footing in rooms she wasn't allowed to navigate with him. And Raymond Ossie, who had given her nothing when she needed something, had quietly been building $3. $8 millionaire that now belonged entirely to her. She didn't feel grateful. She didn't feel vindicated. She felt the weight of both things at once, the loss and the provision, the absence and the strange, late generosity. She let herself feel it in the rest stop parking lot with the engine off, and then she started the car and drove the rest of the way home. Christopher was asleep when she arrived. She put her bag down in the hallway. She stood in the kitchen for a moment. Then she got out a folder and began organizing the copies of documents Marcus had sent to her email. She was not going to tell Christopher. Not yet. The marriage was cracking in ways she had been pretending not to see, and she needed to understand what she wanted before she made any decision about what to reveal. She also simply needed the space to absorb it on her own terms. The trust was hers. Raymond had made sure of that. Whatever came next, she would face it with both eyes open, and the knowledge that she was standing on ground no one could pull from under her. She put the folder in the desk drawer. She went to bed. Somewhere in the dark of that night, she felt something shift, not peace exactly, but something that was the precondition for it. Like ballast being added to a vessel that had been listing for a long time without anyone on board noticing. The conversation happened on a Wednesday evening in February. Christopher came home later than usual, set his briefcase down by the door instead of hanging it in the closet, and asked her to sit down with him. She already knew what shape this was. She sat across from him at the kitchen table. He looked tired, not from overwork, but from the particular exhaustion of having held something unspoken for too long and finally deciding it was time. "I think we've grown in different directions," he said. He delivered it carefully, like something he had practiced. "I'm not happy, and I don't think you are either. I think we've been in different places for a while, and neither of us has said it." "You want to separate," she said. He nodded. "I think it would be best." She looked at him for a moment, at the man who had stood on a courthouse steps in a borrowed blazer and promised to be someone who did not forget, and she felt something very quiet and very complete settle inside her chest. "All right," she said. He blinked. She could tell he'd prepared for a different response. "I'll take some things and stay at Marcus Chen's place for a while," he said. Marcus Chen. A colleague from law school, now also at Marshall & Cole. It occurred to her that she'd never met Marcus Chen. "I'll have the rest of your things organized," she said. He left the next morning with 2 suitcases and his laptop bag. She stood at the window and watched the car pull away. Then she went to the kitchen and made coffee and sat with it for a while before she did anything else. Dorothy called that afternoon. "It's for the best," she said. "You both deserve to be happy." Her voice carried the specific tone of relief that people use when something they'd wanted finally becomes permissible. "Thank you for calling, Dorothy," Amara said. She hung up. She did not call Dorothy again. Sandra heard about the separation from Amara's own mouth the morning after at the stall. She was quiet for a moment and then said, "What do you need?" "I need to work for about 4 hours without thinking about it," Amara said. "Then work," Sandra said, and she covered the neighboring stall and sent customers in Amara's direction all morning. By mid-March, a colleague of Christopher's, who Amara had met at the firm's summer event, and ran into her at the grocery store and said, with a look that carried both information and apology, that Christopher and Vanessa Cole had been seen at a restaurant downtown. "A dinner, not a working dinner. I thought you should know," the woman said. "I'm sorry." "It's fine," Amara said. She meant it, or was close enough to meaning it that the difference didn't seem worth tracking. She had already known. She had known before she needed anyone to tell her. She made 2 more trips to Atlanta in March and April. She signed the formal documents accepting full distribution of the OC Family Trust. She transferred the investment accounts into her name. She took over as named contact for the rental properties management company. She opened a new personal account at a bank in Charleston that Christopher had no knowledge of. She did all of this through Marcus Webb. Quietly, in the time she told Christopher she was doing supplier runs, she also, at Marcus's recommendation, hired an attorney. Diana Reeves had an office in a modest building on King Street. She was direct, thorough, and disinterested in performing reassurance she didn't believe. She reviewed Amara's full financial picture, noted that Amara had contributed significantly to the shared household, and had documentary evidence going back 6 years, and told her exactly what she was entitled to. "Are you prepared for this to move forward?" Diana asked. "Yes," Amara said. She had never been more prepared for anything in her life. The business administration class ended. She received the highest grade in the course. The instructor asked if she planned to continue to the certificate program. She said she was considering it. She went home and enrolled that evening. At the market, something Sandra had noticed and Toby had noticed, and 2 of the other regular vendors had noticed, was that Amara was different. Steadier. Not calmer in the way that people get calm when they've given up, but calmer in the way that a ship gets stable when it's properly weighted. She stood differently. She moved through the market with the particular authority of someone stopped pretending to ask permission. On the first Thursday in May, Toby arrived with the shrimp delivery and paused after setting the crates down. "You're better," he said. Not a question. "I am," she said. "Good." He checked the delivery ticket against his clipboard. "The blue crab's excellent this week. I'll bring an extra pound on Friday if you want it." "I want it," she said. He drove away. She watched the truck turn at the corner and thought, not for the first time, that some people make the decision to show up without needing to be asked, and that this quality, consistent, practical, undemonstrative, was one of the rarest things she knew. Christopher's attorney contacted Diana in late May. Christopher wanted to file for divorce. He expected the process to be manageable. His attorney described the shared assets as the house and a joint savings account. He requested a settlement that included the house going to Christopher, who had, his attorney noted, been the primary income earner in the most recent years of the marriage. Diana called Amara after the contact. "His attorney believes you have minimal assets," Diana said. "I know," Amara said. "We'll file the formal response with full disclosure, as required." A brief pause. "He won't be expecting what we file." "No," Amara said. "He won't." She went back to the stall. There were customers waiting. She put on her gloves and got to work. The divorce papers arrived on a Wednesday morning in June. Amara was at the stall by 5:30, unloading the day's first delivery, when a courier appeared at the market entrance and called her name across the still quiet space. She walked over, signed the clipboard, and took the envelope. Sandra looked up from her side of the divider. Amara set the envelope on the counter beside the register. She went back to unloading. "You're not going to open it?" Sandra said. "When I'm done with the crates." She finished the unloading, washed her hands, and opened the envelope at the counter. The papers were formal, precise, drafted by a firm she recognized from East Bay Street. Christopher was requesting dissolution of the marriage on the grounds of irreconcilable differences. He was petitioning for the house on the basis of his contribution to the mortgage in the final years of the marriage. The proposed settlement offered Amara a portion of the joint savings account, $14,000, and assumed she had no additional assets to declare. $14,000. For 6 years of early mornings and sold jewelry and debt carried in her name. She read the full document. Then she folded it back into the envelope. Sandra had been watching without speaking. "How bad?" she asked. "He thinks it's straightforward," Amara said. "He thinks I have nothing." Sandra set down what she was holding and looked at Amara directly. "Does he know?" she asked. "No. Are you going to tell him?" Amara put the envelope in her apron pocket. "Diana's going to file our response this week. He'll learn through the process." "Through the process," Sandra repeated, and her voice carried a particular dryness. "That's how it works," Amara said. She put her gloves back on. Christopher's attorney, a man named Elliot Harver, had assembled a tidy case. Christopher contributed to the mortgage for the last 2 years. He held the primary income position. The proposed settlement was framed as generous. Harver's letter to Diana, which Diana forwarded without commentary, described Amara's economic situation as modest and suggested that a quick resolution would benefit both parties. Diana filed her response on Friday. The response listed Amara's full financial assets, as required under South Carolina disclosure law, the OC Family Trust, the 4 residential rental properties in Atlanta with their current assessed values, the commercial property under lease, the investment accounts, and the cash reserves. Total declared assets, $8 million. Diana called Amara after filing. "Harver's office called me within the hour," Diana said. "They're requesting time to review the documentation." "That's fine," Amara said. "Christopher may also contact you directly. I'd recommend directing him to me." He called that same evening. She was at the kitchen table. The house was still hers for now, while the proceedings sorted themselves, working through her business course reading. She looked at his name on the screen for a moment, then answered. "What is this?" His voice was controlled, but stripped of its professional smoothness. There was something underneath it she hadn't heard in a long time. Genuine surprise. "You'll need to speak with Diana Reeves," she said. "Amara, what is the OC Family Trust? Why is there a Christopher?" "Call Diana." A silence. "I didn't know," he said. "I know," she said. She ended the call. She turned back to her textbook. The following days had a particular quality she hadn't anticipated. Not satisfaction exactly, but a kind of structural clarity. Things were becoming what they had always been. The story of her marriage was going to be told now with all its actual facts present. And that, however uncomfortable, felt like a relief after months of moving through a version of events that only included part of the truth. Toby arrived Thursday morning with the week's delivery. He worked through the loading without commenting on anything unusual. When he was done, he stood for a moment while she signed the receipt. "I heard there are divorce papers," he said. "You heard correctly." "All right," he said. He took the receipt back. "The scallops coming in Friday are good, pre-sized if you want them." "I want them," she said. He nodded once and went back to his truck. She watched him go and thought about the particular mercy of people who understood that the most useful thing they could do at a given moment was continue doing their job. Sandra came by at midday with a takeaway box from the cafe down the block. She set it on the counter without comment. Amara ate it standing up between customers. "Thank you," she said. "You're not going to say anything else, are you?" Sandra said. "No." "Good. Neither am I." That Saturday, Amara drove to Diana's office for a case review meeting. She sat across from Diana and went through every document, every line of the response filing, every question Diana had marked for discussion. She asked her own questions, practical, precise, no more than she needed answered. When they finished, Diana walked her to the elevator. "You're very calm," Diana said. "I've had months to prepare," Amara said. "Most clients aren't like this." "I'm not most clients," Amara said. She said it without performance. It was simply the fact of it. Mediation was scheduled for 3 weeks out. A Friday morning at a conference room downtown, both attorneys present, a neutral mediator available if needed. Christopher's side had requested the meeting be kept private, with no press contacts. Amara had no interest in press contacts, she agreed. She left the office and walked back to the market. There was still afternoon business to handle. She put on her apron, took her position behind the counter, and worked through the rest of the day. Some things are only over when they're officially over. She knew that. She was willing to wait. The conference room was on the 12th floor of an office building on Meeting Street, with floor-to-ceiling windows looking toward the harbor. Amara arrived 7 minutes before the scheduled time with Diana Reeves. They took the side of the table facing the door. Christopher arrived with Elliot Harver 3 minutes later. He wore a suit she didn't recognize, something new from the past few months. He looked at her when he came in, and she held the look without adjusting anything in her expression. There was nothing hostile in it. There was also nothing she was going to give him for free. Harver moved through pleasantries with Diana. The mediator, a retired family court judge named Patricia Okafor, introduced herself and explained the structure of the session. Christopher sat across from Amara and did not look at her again. He was very composed. He had been composing himself for a career. He was good at it. Diana spoke first. She presented Amara's financial disclosure in the same calm, organized way she approached everything. She laid the document in the center of the table, a 12-page summary with supporting attachments, and walked through each section without editorializing. Osei Family Trust, established 2019. Sole beneficiary, Amara Osei Williams. Née Osei. Current total value, $8 million. Assets included 4 residential rental properties in DeKalb and Fulton counties, 1 commercial property on lease in Marietta, 2 investment portfolios under professional management, and a cash reserve position. She itemized the properties. She cited the current assessments. She noted the investment account values as of the previous month's statement. She placed the supporting documents in a neat stack to the right of the summary. Christopher's posture changed. It was subtle, not a collapse, just a recalibration. His shoulders moved slightly back. His hands, which had been resting on the table with professional ease, shifted to his lap. He read the numbers on the summary sheet. He read them again. Harver leaned over and conferred with him in a low voice. Christopher listened, his expression held. "We'll need a brief recess to review the documentation," Harver said. "Of course," Diana said. The mediator called a 15-minute recess. In the hallway outside the conference room, Christopher appeared at Amara's elbow before she'd reached the water station. "Can we speak privately?" he asked. "Our attorneys are present," she said. "Just for a moment." "I'm not." He stopped. He started again. "I genuinely didn't know, Amara. I know that," she said. He was quiet for a moment. He was looking at her in a way he hadn't looked at her in a very long time, actually looking, not managing a version of her. "When did this happen?" "I found out 10 months ago. My father died. Raymond Osei." He said the name carefully. "You never told me about him." "No," she said. "I didn't." He stood there for a moment longer, and she could see him running the calculation, all of it. The years, the money, the marriage, the fish market, the woman across from him who had signed for his registration fee at 23 and never asked for it back. "I didn't know," he said again. "I know you didn't," she said. "But you also called me someone from home at your firm party last October, and your mother came to my kitchen to tell me I was damaging your image. And you described yourself to your attorney as the primary earner in our marriage, without acknowledging what I contributed before you had income to earn." She kept her voice even. She was not speaking from anger. She was stating what had happened. "You didn't know about the trust, but you knew enough about me to make the decisions you made." He said nothing. His phone buzzed in his pocket. He looked at the screen. She saw his face change slightly, a particular settling, the way a face changes when a call introduces a complexity you didn't anticipate. He stepped back to take the call. She heard Vanessa Cole's voice, clipped and controlled on the other end, asking something about a case filing. She watched Christopher's face move through 3 different things in 4 seconds. She turned and went back into the conference room. When the session reconvened, Harver informed the mediator that Christopher's side was withdrawing the initial settlement proposal and requesting time to prepare a revised position. Judge Okafor noted the withdrawal and asked Diana if Amara's position had changed. "No," Diana said. Our client's terms are straightforward. She outlined them. The house, which bore Amara's name on the original mortgage document, and to which she had contributed financially throughout the marriage. A fair division of the shared accounts. No spousal support requested from either party. The terms were reviewed. They were fair. They were documented. There was no dispute about the legal standing of any of them. Christopher's attorney made 2 minor counterproposals. Diana addressed both with documentation. The mediator noted that the core terms were reasonable and advised both parties to reach agreement without proceeding to litigation, which would benefit no one. They signed before noon. When the session was over and the room was clearing, Christopher stopped at the door. Was there ever a chance you would have told me? He asked. His voice was quiet. There was no one else close enough to hear. She looked at him. She considered the question honestly, the way she tried to do most things. There was a chance, she said. You used it to introduce me to your colleague. He held the door open. He stepped aside to let her pass first. She walked out. Diana fell into step beside her as they reached the elevator. Neither of them spoke until the doors closed. You all right? Diana asked. Yes, Amara said, and she was. 6 months after the mediation, Amara arrived at the Charleston public market at 4:40 in the morning and stood for a moment at the entrance before going in. The market looked the same. It always looked the same in that pre-dawn hour, the overhead lights and the smell of brine and cold concrete, the sound of crates being moved deeper inside, the specific quality of quiet that only exists before a city decides to wake up. She had stood here most mornings of her adult life. She would stand here many more. Her stall was different, though. She had used a portion of the trust, a modest, considered portion, guided by Marcus Webb and a financial advisor Marcus had connected her with to upgrade the equipment. The refrigeration unit was new. The display cases were better lit. She'd taken on a second stall space that the market manager had offered her twice over the years, and she'd declined twice, and now she was using it. She had also hired 2 part-time employees. A woman named Janelle, who'd been buying from the stall for 4 years, and had mentioned once that she was looking for work, and a college student named Devon, who appeared early and learned fast. She was paying them fairly. She knew what fair pay looked like, because she had spent years being underpaid by the economy of her own sacrifice. She put on her gloves and work. Toby arrived at 5:15, with the weekly delivery, the same time he always arrived, in the same truck, with the same clipboard. He moved through the unloading without particular ceremony. When the last crate was down, he checked the delivery ticket and she signed it. Gulf shrimp looks good this week, he said. It always looks good when you bring it. He looked at her directly in the way he had, not searching for something, just seeing clearly. Business is up, she said. 12% over last quarter. He nodded once, the nod of someone who considered this to be exactly how things should be and had been waiting patiently for it to happen. He took the signed ticket. He went back to the truck. She watched him pull away and thought, not for the first time, that certain people demonstrate value through the consistency of their showing up, not in dramatic moments, but in every unremarkable one. Toby had been showing up for 5 years. She trusted that more than she had ever trusted a declaration. Sandra and at 6 with coffee from the place down the street. 2 cups, dark roast, no ceremony. She handed one to Amara over the divider and went to open her own stall. How's the class? Sandra asked. I turned in the module on financial management yesterday. Got the feedback this morning. And a minus. A pause. The instructor says I have a good instinct for operational structure. Sandra laughed. Operational structure. You've been operating this stall since you were 22. I know, Amara said, but now I have the certificate to prove it. She worked through the morning at the steady pace she'd built over years. Efficient, attentive, friendly with customers who wanted conversation. Efficient with those who didn't. She had learned early in her market life that the best service is reading what people actually need, rather than performing what you think service should look like. She heard through one of the firm's associates who'd remained cordial that Christopher and Vanessa Cole had ended things in September, 2 months after the mediation. The circumstances weren't widely discussed. The proceedings had surfaced things, apparently, that didn't survive the light. Christopher was still at Marshall & Cole. She had no interest in the details of his life beyond what she needed to know to move through her own. She did not wish him ill. She also did not miss him in the active, present way that grief usually operates. What she felt was more like the specific absence of something that had been difficult for a long time, a weight she'd been carrying that was no longer in her hands. She noticed its absence with something that was not quite relief and not quite grief, but contained elements of both. The house was hers. She'd repainted the kitchen in November, a color Sandra had helped her choose, and she hadn't asked anyone's opinion about whether it was right. At mid-morning, there was a quiet stretch in the foot traffic, and she stood at the edge of her stall and looked toward the harbor. The water was silver gray and moving, the way it moved in December, with a permanence that didn't require anything from the people watching it. Christopher's office had a window that looked east toward this same harbor. She'd thought about that sometimes in the early months, that he was looking at the same water from a different elevation. What she understood now was that the elevation didn't matter. What mattered was whether you knew what you were looking at and what you'd done to get there. She had sold fish for years to build something that mattered. She was still selling fish, and what she'd built quietly in the early mornings, through the cold seasons and the difficult years, and the long stretch of being someone nobody in Christopher's world thought to see, was still standing. Larger now, steadier, documented in folders that no one could rearrange without her signature. She turned back to the stall. Devon was managing the display case, and Janelle was with a regular customer who was having strong opinions about the day's flounder, which Amara could have told her was perfectly fresh. She walked over and settled the matter in 12 seconds, and the customer left satisfied, and Devon looked at her with the particular expression of someone who has just watched a professional operate. "How did you do that?" he asked. 12 years, she said, and paying attention. She went back to her position. The morning was moving the way good mornings move, purposefully, without hurry, with the particular fullness that comes from being exactly where you're supposed to be. If you've ever known what it is to build something out of nothing, to carry more than your share for longer than anyone noticed, to stand in your own story without being seen, then you know why this mattered. Leave a comment and let us know what you thought of Amara's journey. She didn't wait for permission, she just kept going.